3 days later, Karen Whitmore's world was collapsing in spectacular fashion. What started as a 30-second confrontation had mushroomed into a national scandal that destroyed everything she'd spent decades building. Karen sat in the sterile waiting room of her lawyer's office, scrolling through her phone with mounting horror. The hashtag HOA Karen had garnered 12 million views. Her face was plastered across every major news outlet, accompanied by headlines like HOA President attacks disabled teen's service dog and federal judge's family terrorized by neighborhood tyrant. But the viral videos were just the beginning of her nightmare. Mrs. Whitmore, her attorney, James Morrison, entered looking grim. "We need to talk about the federal charges." Karen looked up, her eyes bloodshot from 3 sleepless nights. Her perfectly maintained appearance had crumbled. Her hair was unwashed, her expensive clothes wrinkled, and her face was gaunt with stress. "Just tell me it's going to be okay," she pleaded. "Tell me this will all blow over." Morrison sat down heavily. "Karen, the Justice Department has assigned their top civil rights prosecutor to this case. They're treating it as a federal hate crime with disability bias enhancement." "Hate crime?" Karen's voice cracked. "I never said anything about his disability." "You attacked his service dog and made racially charged comments about you people," Morrison replied bluntly. "It's all on video. Multiple angles." Karen's phone buzzed with another notification. This time, it was her insurance agent. She'd been dropped from 3 policies in 2 days: homeowners, auto, and umbrella coverage. No company wanted to be associated with the HOA Karen. "There's more," Morrison continued. "Judge Chen has filed a civil rights lawsuit in federal court. He's seeking damages for medical expenses, emotional distress, and punitive damages." "How much are we talking about?" $2 million. Karen felt the room spin. "I don't have $2 million. "That's not the worst part," Morrison said quietly. "Your husband called this morning. He's filing for divorce and wants you out of the house by Friday." The words hit Karen like a physical blow. Richard had been married to her for 20 years. But watching his wife's public meltdown and the subsequent threats against their family had been the final straw. "He can't do that," Karen whispered. "That's our house. Actually, it's his house. It's been in his family for 30 years, and it's not community property." Morrison pulled out a legal document. "He's also filed a restraining order. You can't go within 500 feet of the property." Karen stared at the paperwork in disbelief. "My own husband, Karen, your neighbors are getting death threats because of your actions." The HOA is facing a $1 million lawsuit from the Chen family, and property values in Meadowbrook Estates have dropped 15% since the story broke. Richard's trying to salvage what he can. Her phone rang. The caller ID showed her employer Meridian Real Estate, where she'd worked as a senior agent for 8 years. "Don't answer it," Morrison advised, but Karen was already picking up. "Karen, this is Bob." Her boss's voice was ice cold. "Clear out your desk. You're terminated, effective immediately." "Bob, please, we've lost 6 major clients in 2 days because of you. Our Google reviews are tanking, and we're getting boycott threats. You're toxic, Karen. Don't ever contact this office again." The line went dead. Morrison watched Karen crumble before his eyes. "There's something else you need to know?" The FBI's investigation uncovered some ... irregularities. "What kind of irregularities?" "They've been going through HOA financial records. Apparently, there are questions about how the community improvement funds were spent over the past 5 years. Karen's face went white. She'd been skimming money from the HOA accounts for years, small amounts that she justified as administrative fees, nothing that would be noticed in the normal course of business. "How much are they saying I took? $87,000? The number hung in the air like a death sentence. Combined with the federal assault charges, financial crimes could put Karen away for 20 years. Meanwhile, across town, Marcus Chen was having his first therapy session since the attack. Dr. Rebecca Santos, a specialist in trauma counseling, sat across from the teenager in her comfortable office. "How are you sleeping, Marcus?" she asked. "Gently. Not great," Marcus admitted. "I keep thinking about Apollo's face when she kicked him. He didn't understand why someone would hurt him." Apollo lay beside Marcus's wheelchair, his breathing back to normal, but his usual exuberant energy notably subdued. The veterinary exam had revealed bruised ribs and soft tissue damage, but the psychological impact on both dog and handler was harder to quantify. Have you been having any seizures since the incident? Marcus nodded reluctantly. 2 small ones, but Apollo's been off his game. He's still protecting me, but he's more anxious now, more watchful. Dr. Santos made notes. That's normal for both of you. You've both experienced trauma, and it's going to take time to process. I don't understand why she hated us so much, Marcus said quietly. We weren't doing anything wrong. Some people carry so much anger and fear that they lash out at anyone they see as different, Dr. Santos explained. It's not about you or your family, it's about her own broken places. Back at Morrison's office, Karen was learning about the final blow to her crumbling empire. The HOA board voted unanimously to expel you, Morrison reported. They're also filing their own lawsuit. For breach of fiduciary duty and embezzlement? Karen laughed, a broken sound that bordered on hysteria. Unanimous. Even Margaret Peterson. She was my friend for 15 years. Margaret Peterson gave an interview to Channel 7 yesterday. She said, and I quote, "I'm ashamed I ever associated with someone capable of such cruelty." The betrayal cut deeper than any legal consequence. Karen had built her identity around being the respected neighborhood leader. Now, those same people were publicly denouncing her. What about my children? Karen asked desperately. Have you heard from Bradley or Michelle? Morrison's expression grew even more grave. Your son Bradley released a statement on Facebook yesterday. He said he's changing his last name and cutting all contact with you. Your daughter, Michelle. She's not taking your calls. Karen buried her face in her hands. In 72 hours, she'd lost her job, her marriage, her home, her children, her friends, and her future. All because she couldn't control her rage. At seeing a disabled teenager with his service dog, her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number, Karen Whitmore. This is TMZ. We'd like to offer you $50,000 for an exclusive interview about the service dog incident. Even the vultures were circling now. What happens next? Karen asked Morrison, her voice barely a whisper. Federal arraignment is tomorrow. Morning, Judge Patricia Williams is presiding. Karen's head snapped up. Not Judge Chen. No, he recused himself due to obvious conflict of interest. But Judge Williams has a reputation for being tough on hate crimes. Morrison gathered his papers. Karen, I have to ask, is there anything else you haven't told me? Any other incidents with the Chen family or other neighbors? Karen's silence stretched too long. Karen, there might be some emails, she admitted, to the HOA board, about keeping certain people out of the neighborhood. Morrison closed his eyes. What kind of emails? I may have suggested that we needed to be more selective about who we approved. For residency, to maintain property values, did you specifically mention race or ethnicity? Karen's silence was answer enough. Morrison stood abruptly. Karen, you've been lying to me. Those emails constitute a pattern of discrimination that supports the hate crime charges. The federal prosecutor is going to crucify you. As Karen sat alone in the law office, contemplating the complete destruction of her life, she finally understood the magnitude of her mistake. She'd attacked the wrong family at the wrong time for the wrong reasons. But the most terrifying realization was yet to come. Judge David Chen hadn't even begun to fight back. Tomorrow morning, when she stood before Judge Williams for her arraignment, Karen Whitmore would learn that federal justice moves like an unstoppable force and was about to be crushed beneath its weight. The gathering crowd of neighbors created an amphitheater of judgment around the confrontation. Phone cameras captured every moment as Karen Whitmore realized the magnitude of her mistake. But instead of backing down, she doubled down with the desperate fury of someone watching their world crumble. I don't care if you're the Supreme Court, she shrieked, her voice cracking with hysteria. This is still my neighborhood, and I make the rules here. Dr. Sarah Chen emerged from the house, her medical bag in hand. She'd been preparing for her shift at the hospital when she heard the commotion. One look at Apollo's labored breathing, and Marcus's pale face told her everything she needed to know. Get away from my family, Sarah said, her voice deadly calm as she knelt beside the injured dog. As an emergency room physician, she'd seen the aftermath of human cruelty countless times. But watching it happen to her own family ignited something fierce within her. Sarah, call the vet, David said, his judicial mask slipping for just a moment to reveal the protective father underneath and document Apollo's injuries. Karen's eyes darted between the three Chen family members. Finally, beginning to understand she was vastly outmatched. "You can't intimidate me with your fancy titles," she said, but her voice wavered. "Mrs. Whitmore," David said, pulling out his phone, "I'm now calling the FBI field office. Federal crimes require federal investigation." "The FBI," Karen's face went ashen. "Over a dog." "Over a federal service animal," David corrected. "Dialing Special Agent Martinez. This is Judge Chen. I need to report an assault on a service animal under USC Title 18, Section 1368. The blood drained from Karen's face as she heard the legal terminology. Around them, neighbors whispered among themselves, several already, uploading videos to social media with captions like HOA, Karen attacks, disabled teen's service dog. "You're overreacting," Karen said desperately. "It was just a little kick. The dog is fine," Apollo whimpered, still struggling to breathe normally. Sarah's examination revealed possible rib bruising, and the dog's usual alertness was replaced by confused distress. "Marcus, how are you feeling?" Sarah asked her son while keeping pressure on Apollo's side. I'm okay, Mom," Marcus replied, though his hands were shaking. The stress of the confrontation was triggering the neurological symptoms that made Apollo so essential to his daily life. Apollo, despite his own pain, sensed his handler's distress and tried to perform his trained response. The dog's attempt to help while injured brought tears to several neighbors' eyes. "This is ridiculous," Karen announced to the crowd. "I'm going to call the real police and have these people arrested for harassment." "Please do," David said coolly, ending his call with the FBI. "Officer Rodriguez should be here any minute." "I called him too." Karen fumbled for her phone, dialing 911 with shaking fingers. "I need police at 245 Elm Street. There's a family here threatening me with a vicious dog." The 911 operator's voice was clearly audible in the morning air. "Ma'am, we already have units en route to that address. A federal judge reported an assault." Karen's phone slipped from her nerveless fingers. Officer Rodriguez arrived first, followed closely by his partner. The veteran cop took one look at the scene: the injured service dog, the disabled teenager, the composed federal judge, and the hysterical woman, and immediately understood the situation. Judge Chen Rodriguez nodded respectfully. "What's the situation?" "Officer Rodriguez, this woman attacked my son's service dog." David's voice carried the weight of sworn testimony. "There are multiple witnesses and video evidence." "That's not what happened," Karen exploded. "They moved into our neighborhood and started breaking HOA rules." "I was just trying to maintain order by kicking a service dog," Rodriguez asked, his tone carefully neutral. "It's not a real service dog," Karen insisted. "Look at them, they're just trying to get special treatment." The collective gasp from the gathered neighbors was audible. Mrs. Patterson, a retired teacher who lived across the street, stepped forward. "Officer, I saw the whole thing," she said firmly. "That woman attacked the boy's dog for no reason. It was horrible." More neighbors voiced their agreement. The Johnsons, the Martinezes, the elderly Mr. Thompson all confirmed Karen's unprovoked assault. "Ma'am, I need you to calm down," Rodriguez told Karen. "You're under arrest for assault, animal cruelty, and interference with a service animal." "You can't arrest me." Karen's voice rose to a shriek. "I'm the HOA president. I'm a respected member of this community." "Not anymore," came a voice from the back of the crowd. Tom Bradley, the HOA vice president, pushed through the gathering. He'd been watching the live streams on social media, and emergency calls from other board members had brought him rushing over. "Karen, as of this moment, you're suspended from the HOA board pending a full investigation," Tom announced. "Your actions don't represent this community." Karen whirled on him. "You can't do that. I built this neighborhood. I made it what it is." "What you made," Tom replied sadly, "is a liability. The HOA's insurance company is already calling. We're looking at federal lawsuits, civil rights violations, and a public relations nightmare." As if summoned by his words, a news van pulled up to the curb. Channel 7's morning reporter, Jessica Walsh, stepped out with her cameraman. The story was already trending on social media. #HOA Karen and #ServiceDogAttack were climbing the charts. "This is a disaster," Karen moaned, finally beginning to grasp the scope of her situation. Special Agent Martinez arrived just as Rodriguez was reading Karen her rights. The FBI agent, whom David had worked with on several federal cases, assessed the situation quickly. Judge Chen, Dr. Chen, Martinez nodded to both parents. "How's your son?" "Physically, he's okay," Sarah replied. But the emotional trauma, she gestured to Marcus, who was still pale and shaky despite Apollo's gentle presence, and the service dog, injured but stable. "We're taking him to the emergency vet as soon as possible." Martinez turned to Karen, who was now handcuffed and sitting in the back of Rodriguez's patrol car. "Mrs. Whitmore, you're looking at federal charges that carry up to 10 years in prison and significant fines." 10 years. Karen's voice was a whisper. For kicking a dog, for committing a hate crime against a disabled minor and his federally protected service animal, Martinez corrected. "The Justice Department takes these cases very seriously." The news reporter approached David with professional courtesy. "Judge Chen, would you care to comment?" David looked at his son, who was gently stroking Apollo's head despite the dog's obvious discomfort. The sight of his child's quiet strength after such a traumatic experience filled him with pride and renewed fury. "My comment is simple," David said, his voice carrying to every phone, camera, and news microphone. "No child should have to endure what my son experienced today. No service animal should be attacked for doing their job, and no one, regardless of their position in any organization, is above the law." As Karen was driven away in the patrol car, her final words echoed across the neighborhood. "This isn't over. I'll fight this. I'll sue all of you." But it was over. The videos were already viral. The FBI investigation was underway, and the legal machinery that David Chen understood better than anyone was beginning to turn. Karen Whitmore had started her morning as a self-important HOA president. She was ending it as a federal defendant facing a decade in prison, her reputation destroyed, her authority shattered, and her life forever changed by one moment of cruel stupidity. As the crowd dispersed and the news van departed, David knelt beside his son's wheelchair. "How are you holding up, Marcus?" "I'm okay, Dad," Marcus said, though his voice was still shaky. "Is Apollo going to be all right?" Apollo, as if hearing his name, managed a weak tail wag and licked Marcus's hand. "He's going to be fine," Sarah said, though her medical training told her the psychological trauma to both boy and dog would take time to heal. "We're all going to be fine." But as they prepared to take Apollo to the veterinary hospital, David Chen was already planning his next move, and Whitmore thought the arrest was the end of her troubles. She had no idea that the real consequences were just beginning. The golden retriever's yelp of pain echoed across the pristine neighborhood as the HOA president's boot connected with its ribs. 17-year-old Marcus Chen sat helpless in his wheelchair, watching his service dog, his lifeline, to the sidewalk. "That's what happens to fake dogs in my neighborhood," Karen Whitmore sneered, her manicured finger jabbing at the disabled teenager. She had no idea that the quiet man stepping out of the modest house behind them had just sentenced 3 federal criminals to life in prison that morning. Judge David Chen was about to deliver a verdict that would change everything. The morning sun cast long shadows across Meadowbrook Estates as Marcus Chen guided his wheelchair down the sidewalk, his golden retriever, Apollo, padding steadily beside him. The 17-year-old had been looking forward to this routine walk, one of the few activities that gave him a sense of independence since the car accident that had changed everything 6 months ago. Apollo wore his bright blue service vest, the words "Medical Alert Dog" clearly visible in white letters. The 2-year-old retriever had been specially trained to detect Marcus's seizures, often giving him crucial minutes of warning before an episode struck. More than that, Apollo had become Marcus's closest companion during the darkest period of his life. "Good boy," Marcus murmured, reaching down to pat Apollo's head as they paused at the corner of Elm and Birch Streets. The dog's tail wagged once, but his intelligent brown eyes remained alert, constantly scanning for any signs of distress from his human. The peaceful morning was shattered by the sharp click of heels on concrete. "Excuse me," the voice cut through the air like a knife. "Excuse me, young man." Marcus turned to see a woman in her 50s striding toward them, her platinum blonde hair pulled into a severe bun, her navy blue blazer pristine despite the early hour. Karen Whitmore, HOA, president and self-appointed guardian of Meadowbrook Estates property values, had been watching from her corner house. "Yes, ma'am," Marcus replied politely, the way his parents had taught him. Karen's eyes narrowed as she approached, her gaze fixed on Apollo. Dogs are not permitted in this neighborhood without proper registration and approval from the HOA board. I don't recall seeing any paperwork for this, animal. He's my service dog, Marcus explained, his voice steady despite the familiar. Not forming in his stomach, he'd dealt with skeptics before, but something about this woman's aggressive stance made him uneasy. He's legally allowed to service dog. Karen's laugh was sharp and humorless. You look perfectly fine to me, and that's just a regular golden retriever. I've seen plenty of them. Marcus felt his chest tighten. I have a seizure disorder. Apollo is trained to detect. Oh, please. Karen rolled her eyes dramatically. Do you have any idea how many people try to pass off their pets as service dogs these days? It's an epidemic of fraud, and I won't have it in my neighborhood. Apollo sensed the rising tension and moved closer to Marcus's wheelchair, his body language shifting to a more protective stance. The dog's ears were alert, his muscles coiled with the readiness that came from months of specialized training. Ma'am, I have all the proper documentation, Marcus said, reaching for his backpack. I can show you. I don't want to see your fake papers, Karen snapped, stepping closer. What I want is for you to take this mongrel and get out of our neighborhood. Meadowbrook Estates is a family community with standards. The words hit Marcus like a physical blow. He'd been dealing with his disability for 6 months, but the casual cruelty of strangers still caught him off guard. I live here, he said. Quietly, my family moved in 3 months ago. The Asians in the blue house. Karen's expression grew even more hostile. I should have known. You people think you can just move in and ignore our rules. Marcus felt the familiar warning signs, the slight tremor in his hands, the way sounds seemed to echo strangely. Apollo immediately pressed against his leg, whining softly. The dog's training kicked in, his body language shifting to alert mode. My dog is trying to help me, Marcus said urgently. Please, I need to. Enough. Karen's voice rose to a shout. I'm tired of this charade. Without warning, she lunged forward and grabbed Apollo's service vest, trying to yank it off. The dog, trained never to leave his handler's side during a medical episode, held his ground but yelped in distress as the vest pulled tight around his chest. Stop! Marcus reached out desperately, but Karen was already pulling harder. If you won't take this costume off, I will, she snarled. That's when Marcus saw his father appear at the end of the driveway. Judge David Chen had been heading to his car when he heard the commotion. He moved with the quiet authority of a man who'd spent 15 years on the federal bench, but his pace quickened when he saw the scene unfolding. Let go of my son's dog, David said, his voice carrying the weight of judicial command. Karen whirled around, still gripping Apollo's vest. And you must be the father. Well, let me tell you something. Release the dog now, David's voice dropped to a dangerous quiet. I will not. Karen's face flushed red. This is fraud, pure and simple, and I won't stand for it in my neighborhood. She gave Apollo's vest a vicious yank. The dog yelped again, but worse, the sudden movement threw Marcus off balance. His wheelchair tilted, and he had to grab the armrests to keep from falling. That's when Apollo did what his training had taught him. He tried to steady his handler. But, as the dog moved to brace against the wheelchair, Karen saw her opportunity. Attacking me, she shrieked, though Apollo hadn't touched her. This vicious animal is attacking me. And then she did the unthinkable. Karen Whitmore drew back, her designer boot, and kicked Apollo directly in the ribs. The dog's yelp of pain echoed across the pristine neighborhood. Apollo crumpled to the sidewalk, his breathing labored, his eyes wide with shock and confusion. He'd never been hurt by a human before. His world had been one of careful training, gentle hands, and constant positive reinforcement. Marcus cried. Outreaching desperately for his companion, Apollo, David Chen, had seen many things in his courtroom: murders, kidnappings, acts of terrorism. But watching someone deliberately harm his disabled son's service dog triggered something primal. He was moving before he'd even made the conscious decision. You just assaulted a federal service animal, David said, his voice carrying the cold fury of absolute authority. In front of a federal judge, Karen's face went white. A what? Judge David Chen, United States District Court. He knelt beside Apollo, checking the dog's breathing, while keeping his eyes on Karen. And you've just committed a federal crime. For the first time since the confrontation began, Karen Whitmore looked uncertain. I didn't know you were a judge. That's irrelevant. David helped Marcus check on Apollo, who was trying to stand despite his obvious pain. The law doesn't care about your ignorance. Now wait just a minute, Karen said, her voice rising again as she tried to regain control. I am the HOA president, and I have every right to enforce our community standards. This is still my neighborhood, judge or no judge. David Chen stood slowly, and something in his movement made Karen take an involuntary step backward. When he spoke, his voice carried 15 years of judicial authority. Mrs. Whitmore, you have just committed assault on a minor animal cruelty, interference with a service animal, and violation of the Americans with Disabilities Act, all of which are federal crimes. He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. You want to enforce community standards? Let me show you what real enforcement looks like. Karen's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. Behind her, neighbors were beginning to emerge from their houses, drawn by the commotion. Several were already recording with their phones. You can't threaten me, she said, but her voice lacked its earlier conviction. I'm not threatening you, David replied calmly. I'm informing you of your legal situation. There's a difference when you're about to learn intimately. As Apollo struggled to his feet, leaning heavily against Marcus's wheelchair, Judge David Chen was already composing the federal complaint in his mind. Karen Whitmore had picked the wrong family to terrorize, and she was about to discover that some mistakes have consequences that stretch far beyond a homeowners association.